Welcome to the 40th episode of the Hail Married podcast. I'm A. Toves, and I'm joined by my husband, the Toves. We're back to give our hot takes on our win over Western Kentucky and throw some Hail Mary shots downfield for our listeners to love or hate. Let's get started. The game wasn't the offensive showdown that we were all expecting, but the Roadrunners hung on for the win. The Roadrunners have tried all season to get their run game going, and finally were successful this game with 213 of 486 yards of offense coming on the ground. The offense had a great start, scoring a rushing touchdown on their first possession, but would stall on their next two drives. After Western Kentucky briefly took the lead in the second quarter, the Roadrunners came back to score on the next two drives with a rushing touchdown from Brady and a 49-yard field goal from Sackett to take a 17-14 lead into halftime. The Roadrunners started off strong in the second half. They methodically drove down the field on the offense, but it almost ended in disaster as Chris Carpenter fumbled on the goal line. Fortunately, Josh Cephas saved the day by recovering the ball in the end zone for a touchdown. They were unable to put the game out of reach when they failed to convert on a fourth down drive in the red zone at the end of the quarter. On defense, the Runners held Western Kentucky scoreless in the third quarter, but let Western Kentucky get back in the game in the fourth by scoring touchdowns on their first two possessions. Ultimately, UTSA did just enough to hold them at bay, recovering an onside kick attempt, quickly scoring a touchdown, and converting on a key 4th and 2 late in the fourth quarter to seal the victory, 31-28. What were your thoughts on the game?
Well, it was very much a take what you can get kind of day, I think, on offense.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was clear that Western Kentucky kind of came in and just did not want to let the big three and Frank go wild. It was like, Frank can throw us down to any of these three receivers and they're just going to rip our defense apart. And their defense really, as I said before, has not been very good. So this, I think, was a good test for the future for UTSA, in which, again, they take what you can get, but I think also you had a key word in the recap, which was methodically. Mm-hmm. And that was, I think important, because I think there were times when Frank got a little impatient and tried to, I don't think he had his accuracy down at times. Mm-hmm. But, otherwise it just felt like, it felt like, that we could have attacked a little bit more, but on the other hand, it was like, no, this is what Western Kentucky wanted us to try and prove that we could do. That said, what did you think about the game overall?
It's interesting. My thoughts and emotions were very different at the end of the game compared to when I watched Traylor in his post-game press conference. Like, he just seemed excited, just really happy about how the team played. He said it was the most complete win that they had. He compared it to an NFL game, and, maybe his comparison to the NFL game is why I felt the way I did, because I sort of felt like at the end of the game, like, this sigh of relief, like, okay, we hung on and won. And part of it was because, again, we've become accustomed to a much more exciting offense, a lot of passing. Yeah. And this game was much more balanced in terms of the run game. And for those of you who know me, they know that I'm not really into the NFL because, again, it is a much more methodical game. You see a lot more short passes just to get, the first down. You see run plays, and again, it's the lack of those crazy trick plays that we've all become accustomed to from UTSA. The lack of the splashy offense, the downfield passes that you see in college games that you just don't see in the NFL. And so it was just interesting because I kind of felt a little like, again, a sigh of relief. It's not that I wasn't happy that we won, but, I sort of felt like I was kind of holding my breath the whole game. And then to see, that kind of, compared to Traylor, who really was probably one of the most, sort of happy, content Trailers that we've seen in a post game this season.
Yeah, I think I made the comment too. It was like it felt like we were in control, but not in control. Like it was just this weird feeling the entire game where, it did seem like we had opportunities to really put the stamp on the game, but it wasn't anything that Western Kentucky did. It was just to me, failure to execute and failure just to really just put the game away. And you know, I guess for me, you know, looking back, I think, you know, you see that Western Kentucky defense, I had kind of talked about doing a lot of blitzing, didn't blitz, so it didn't give us that man-to-man that Frank would have eaten up again, and just rehashing a little bit of that. And then that offense, it's Western Kentucky fans are just so hype on it, right? Like they're just talking about, like, you know, this is about as good as last year's, but it's not. It's an East-West one that I kind of talked about in the last podcast, and it just seems to be much more conservative.
Right.
Like there was no shots downfield. And
there's a lot of sideline passes.
Yeah, and so those are the kind of bubble screens, kind of quick passes out there, you know, fed into exactly what you talked about in terms of an NFL game. It's just like, let me get the ball out quick and not let the UTSA defense really you know, put a hold on this game. That, and I think part of me really looks back on it and thinks, well, because the UTSA's defense we talked about has just kind of been bad in terms of tackling, what's the easiest way to force them into this? Well, kind of going one-on-one with some of these passes and going east-west, this gets them into some more space, and this forces UTSA to prove or show that they can actually tackle. And we'll get into it a little bit later, but that really wasn't as successful.
Yeah, I think the thing that was probably the most frustrating for me was when Traylor went for it on fourth down in the end zone, like kind of end of third quarter, and if we would have scored, I think the game would have been out of reach from Western Kentucky, and we just, you know, had a bad play call, didn't execute it well, whatever, we'll get into that later, but it just didn't work out, and I think that was the most frustrating thing, was not being able to put the game away. Traylor alluded to the same thing in the post game, where he talked about how we had that opportunity with Houston and we weren't able to execute on it. You know, at least this time, you know, we were able to come out victorious at the end.
Yeah, that opportunity just demoralized Western Kentucky and give them no more hope. Like that just kind of escaped. And that kind of brings me to this next thing that I kind of want to talk about, which is, you know, today we find out that Jared Sackett won CUSA Special Teams Player of the Week. Mm-hmm. Well, I kind of was like, well, he just had a ho-hum performance, right? Like it was 4 extra points and a field goal. And then you remind me, you're like, well, it was a 49-yard field goal. True. But when you watch that field goal, I guess with Jared, as much as we've kind of given him a bit of a hard time in some of these episodes, I know that he can do that, and we've seen his field goal kicking and, you know, the distance that he can kick it. And even this one was like probably could have been good from 60 because it was a hell of a field goal kick.
Yeah.
But it kind of feels like, I don't know, it's just because we see them all the time. It's just like we're almost minimizing some of the I would say great play from UTSA players, right? And it's almost kind of taken for granted. At least I feel that way. Maybe others don't, but I kind of wanted to bring this up because, you know, it did get me thinking. Let me ask you this. Are we as UTSA fans really kind of expecting a level of unrealistic dominance from this team? Like, it's kind of seemed to have caused frustration. So because of it, like, they're just always, well, we didn't tackle, we didn't do this. And it feels like because we've talked about how talented this team is, that because of it, we're really expecting, I would say, maybe blowing out all these opponents. Yet it's not happening. Right.
I mean, and I went back and I looked, you know, at the scores just from last year compared to this year, because at times it felt like we had a lot more, you know, dominant wins last season. I really had to go back and remind myself that it was only really 3 games in which we were very dominant. The other games, it was all one-possession games, or pretty close to one-possession games. So, yeah, I think we have maybe gotten some unrealistic expectations in our minds. I mean, you know, the fact that we won should be exciting, and instead, you know, we're at the point where we're used to winning now, so it's, well, how did we win? And did we, you know, was it a quality win versus a win is a win?
I feel like Michael Scott when he says in The Office, my, how the turntables have turned. It's because just 3 years ago, 2019, like bad on offense, not very good on defense. These are the things that, we look forward to a better coached team. And now we have, I would say, arguably a better coached team.
Yes, absolutely.
But we're not seeing that dominance. And I think also I felt like I maybe get caught up in the fact that it's just still a pretty young program. And to expect that level of dominance, even though you do have much better players than you have had over the last, over the span of this whole UTSA football history, I think just the excitement that Traylor brings and like picking up all these players, seeing that Frank's back, seeing what this offense could be and honestly is, and we'll talk about that here soon, it just feels like there should be a better grip on some of these games. Mm-hmm. And, I think I really wanted to talk that out with you because it just felt like, to me, it was important. It was like, I think, I might have some false expectations.
Right.
And because of that, it's kind of leading to feeling, yet we're 4-2. We're 23, I think 23-9 in the Traylor era. I mean, we were nowhere that record in either our past two coaches. So
no, and given the amount of wins that Traylor has brought over his last 2.5 seasons, we're pretty close to breaking even just as a team, and finally getting to that point where, we're going to have, likely at the end of the season, we'll be a winning program. I mean, and that's so exciting. But again, it really took the Traylor era to get us to that point.
Yeah, and it was a long time, I think, suffering through some bad football that I think even the players would hesitantly admit. Right. But it just wasn't very good. So, long journey. The last thing I want to talk about in this game was the officiating. I made a little kind of comment to you that, like, every single call that was reviewed just stood. The only one that didn't was when your boy Kalechi seemed to have gone in and gone headhunting. But it happened pretty much in front of us, and we pretty much knew that wasn't. Right. No, we knew it was with the shoulder. So we knew that was going to be overturned. However, based on the way the game
I know, I was afraid that they were going to say the call stands, because that was the only one they overturned. It was like, well, we called it on the field, and, I don't know, we have terrible camera angles, we're lazy, I don't know, whatever.
The replay official was like,
I really don't want to look at it. Yeah. It'll just stand. It'll be fine.
Take a couple minutes. I'm going to sip on my tea, coffee, beer, I don't know, Jack and Coke. And, I don't want to go through the whole hassle of having to replay this over and over. So, I mean, it was... I think a lot of the plays, during the rewatch, certainly I think there was a lot of plays that I think, you go with the call. Like, there really wasn't any angle, even from ESPN, that kind of showed it. The only one maybe was it the Dan Dishman call, which led to that 4th and 1. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure that he actually, extended the ball, and I think that was part of the problem. It felt like he had the ball tucked, and he had it on his right shoulder, and when he stepped out after he kind of got clipped by one of the Western Kentucky defenders, when he stepped out around the 6 or so, but it felt like on slow rewatch that he had stepped out and that ball was still behind him. Mm-hmm. Hence why the referee called it the way he did. Now, I'm not saying that it couldn't have been a first down. I'm just saying, when you look at it like that, because he had his right shoulder behind him, I think that affected the call. And, again, I think he needs to just take a little... I think for the future, Dan, talk to our boy Frank Harris, because Frank loves to extend the ball. Mm-hmm. So I think in that case, it would have been safe to extend the ball and you would have been fine. But it was a tough play overall because of the way he kind of got clipped.
The Cephas backstretch.
Yes. All right, let's talk special teams. You want to talk a little bit about that big play from Kyle Wakefield? Yeah,
I mean, we saw the onside kick coming, and, man, Kyle Wakefield was just all over it. And I think your comment in the stands was, who they think we are, Texas? We know an onside kick's coming.
Well, and as much as I made a joke out of it, here's the other thing. As much as we've given Justin Burke a hard time, especially team coordinator, on some of the coverage issues, this to me was all about coaching, because just going back on the rewatch, and I watched it a few different times, I believe it's Ken Robinson that's on the other side of Kyle, both of them kept looking at the kicker, and they did not turn their backs, much like Texas did. That's why UTSA played the onside kick at that time, because if you actually went back and watched that replay of Texas defenders, as soon as Jared was going up to kick off, they immediately turned their heads and backs, and they were starting to go downfield to set up their blocks. Hence why Traylor called the onside, because you're not paying attention to what you're doing. And that has to have seeped into Kyle and possibly even Ken, if it is Ken that was there, because Kyle did exactly what you're supposed to do. He attacked it, because the kicker couldn't do anything. He couldn't. Mm-hmm. He had to wait to touch the ball,
right?
And he just stood there helplessly as Kyle went and attacked it and got it. Now, Kyle could have fumbled around with it or whatever, but again, I think that's why you have Kyle Wakefield right there. And to me, this is all about coaching. I get that Kyle Wakefield did make a great play, and I'm not minimizing it whatsoever, but I think a lot of that also has to be lauded for the coaching. I'm sure they
probably practiced it,
Yeah. But that's the awareness. Those are the sort of small details that I think that sometimes we take for granted. I just wanted to call that out because I think, again, giving Justin Burke a hard time, but I think in the way he coached up Kyle, and again, Kyle being aware. I mean, I'm not minimizing what Kyle did, but I think a lot of that comes to coaching, and good for him for paying attention and being the man on the spot.
Yeah, and overall this game, they're outside of one kickoff return. They had Jarrett kind of kicking it through to the end zone, and they weren't recoverable kicks, or returnable kicks. So this time it was, we didn't give up any yardage except for that one bad kickoff return where, first of all, you could tell that we're not doing a good job with our blocks and our tackling. And then, poor Jared's got to be the guy to try to tackle. And that's when, you miss the Hulk. But then we had to, add insult to injury there and have the late hit so that we gifted them even more yards.
Yeah, a little undisciplined play by Danye Taylor there. But you know what? I thought we just looked kind of sloppy on the way down. And it didn't seem surprising once, Western Kentucky brought it back. That said, I think overall it was good special teams performance. I was frustrated by the fact that Western Kentucky's, I think, one and only punt, or the first punt, I should say, should never have gotten off. I mean, It was a really good play by the Western Kentucky punter because somehow he still got it off.
And he not just got it off, like he managed to kick a really good punt.
It did pin us back a few yards, but I mean, that's again where you would have hoped that UTSA would have been able to get to him and at least tackle him, or at least force him to stumble and potentially, lose the ball or something. But, again, you can go ticky-tacky on some of those plays, but, definitely one I think the special team does want back. I think this is the most we've ever talked about special teams, so kind of giving them their due because, as I was going to actually bring up later, but, it is sad. We are 6 games into the season. That means we're halfway through the season.
Yep.
Like, that's, I think, a tough pill to swallow because it just means we only have possibly 6 more games, potentially a bowl game, to, enjoy this team. So let's move on to the offense. Part of the preview, I talked about grind them on the ground. And I think I'm not the only one that brought this up, but it's one of the best run game performances of the season, as you kind of alluded to earlier in your recap.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was great to see both Brady and Smith, have some nice runs. And you really got to see, I think, in this game, the difference between the two styles of running. Where Smith has that, ability to burst. There were a couple of times when he, instead of following the blockers and going through the middle, he kind of bounced around the side and had some nice runs. And then you really got to see from Brady, man, apparently he's got some pretty powerful legs there because he was able to just dig in and, grind and get the push from the offensive line across the end zone for his touchdown.
It was very much reminiscent. I mean, this is overused, but it's more like thunder and lightning. I mean, you've got the big thunder and Brendan Brady, and you got the lightning quickness of Traylon Smith. And No, I just wished I had made a Hail Mary shot last week and said this was going to be the big Treylon breakout. Didn't happen, but, to your point, there were flashes. And I just wish, as you described, hopefully we can get Treylon out on the edges some more, because I think he's not really the best at his best when he's going up the middle, unless there's a solid hole open. And for the most part, Brendan's really kind of creating those, as you had kind of mentioned, with his strength. Treylon, on the other hand, when he bounces out, I think he starts putting himself in space, and now you're trying to track him down with the speed.
Right.
I think there's still, Traylor kind of mentioned he's still not completely healthy, so, obviously, although I called it early, potentially here for a Hail Mary shot, this would be his breakout game, I think it is coming, because...
Maybe it's next game, because we'll talk about FAU in a little bit, but...
Yeah, absolutely. But let's talk about Frank, because that was the next part of the preview review. He needed to take advantage of those Western Kentucky blitzes. They only blitzed him 4 times. So it's unfair to say, well, he only went 2 for 4 for 7 yards. Yeah, it's not as good as you'd hope. But then again, if they're only blitzing you 4 times,
right?
It's teams, I think, are learning that you just can't be blitzing UTSA all the time. Yes, the offensive line is not the most stout line. I think it's getting better as the season has gone on. However, letting your secondary go one-on-one with the big three and allowing Frank to just kind of, dice him apart, that's just not a recipe for success.
Right.
And I think Western Kentucky was smart in just playing the zone and not blitzing that much, because in doing so, it kept them in the game.
Right.
All right, so one of the things we had talked about was the offense being sluggish, but again, much because it was a ground game and a very, like you had talked about with Traylor, very NFL-ish. So I think that made it hard at times to kind of get in the game, and I think kind of affected a little bit of the timing for, obviously Frank. There were a few times because of that zone, the zone defense that I had mentioned to you. Hey, did you notice that Frank kind of double clutched there? It just seemed like he was he's ready for a pass at a certain time, but because of the zone defense, he realizes, there's defenders in the way. Normally that's open. I can't make that. I'm not going to make that throw. So, I think it got him kind of thinking a little bit too much instead of being able to just go out there and play. And he's a quarterback. He's going to have to do that, but you kind of wish that he would have that opportunity to just let it rip, and what happens. Now I'm not trying to say that I'm hoping that he throws a whole bunch of interceptions so I can come on here and bash him or anything. It's just I think he played smart. It was just I could feel his frustration and not being able to let it go when he wanted to let it go.
One thing that I was going to ask you about was a little interesting to me in this game was that we've really seen Traylor only play the big three for the majority of the minutes. Cephas, JT, Zakari have been out there the majority of the snaps, and you really haven't seen a rotation. But it seemed like he had other receivers rotating through more, and the snap count was still less than I thought it was in my mind when I went back and looked at it. But we saw Tyke out there, we saw Karch Gardner, Chris Carpenter. It just seemed to me like an interesting time for him to start putting in other receivers in this game, and then B, it seemed like Frank was throwing to different receivers this game, and maybe that's just the way the defense was playing, kind of those big three, but just wanted your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I felt like they had kind of taken out the big three a lot, and so I think it really came down to Frank having to find a different receiver. We didn't see much from Oscar. A lot of it was Oscar blocking, and then you kind of saw, you mentioned Karch Gardner. I think that's a throw that, he ended up dropping it, but I think it's a throw that, even though he should have caught it, I will say, I think Frank would want that throw back, because it was kind of lofted a little too much, and Karch had to go up and jump to catch it.
And he's not as tall as the other guys.
No, and he still made a really good play on it to at least get his hands on the ball. The problem is, though, is that, you haven't played, so you're not ready for that hit. To me, I can imagine his hesitancy as he went up to make that catch. A Cephas, a JT is just going to go up there and know they're going to get hit. They felt it for the last 5 games, so nothing different.
Right.
Karch not feeling that type of hit. You bring in, say, a Taiki or somebody else, and I think it's a different story. And so it is interesting that he's starting to kind of bring in, having to kind of rotate some of these wide receivers, but I think you also have to find some time to get those guys some rest because, I think we're going to allude to this a little bit more, but, the tougher conference part of the schedule is starting to come up, and I think we're going to need the big 3 to be pretty fresh.
Right.
Speaking of which, injuries. This offensive line just cannot stay healthy.
No.
Unfortunately, it looks like Mekhi got hurt, and I didn't really notice it. I think he played like three quarter.
Traylor said he walked off the field, like he didn't go down, so that's probably why it wasn't so noticeable.
Yeah, and I think that plays a part into it because with Venley when he went down, that looked like catastrophic. And then when Terrell went down, he was writhing around. So both of those looked catastrophic at the time. Even said as much when we watched the rewatch. It's a good thing they weren't because they were able to come back. I'm just a little hesitant. After seeing all this stuff in the NFL with the concussion protocol, and I get that this wasn't a hit to the head or anything, I still kind of just get hesitant, especially with college players, when it feels like they have to come back in and play. Mm-hmm. So I'm bringing it up more as I think that's something we need to be vigilant as well. Mekhi had just come back from injury, and look, he's injured again, and now it looks like he's out for the season.
Yeah.
So, as much as we focus on the, concussions and everything, it can happen anywhere. And I think we should, as fans, be vigilant and think, should he be coming back at this point?
Well, and likely the same thing happened with Matterson, because didn't he come back and play a game, and now he's out for the season, although...
He went down a couple times during the Middle Tennessee game. The second time, I think, was the one that knocked him out. But, to your point...
You just hate to see that, especially for these super seniors that have come back, You want them to be healthy and get to enjoy their last year eligibility.
Yeah, exactly. So, okay, enough doldrums about the injuries. We're at the midway point, as I referenced earlier. Let's talk a little bit about the offense. It's averaging 498.3 yards per game, which is ranked 11th in the nation. 37.2 points per game, ranked 27th. They're on track for the best offensive yardage and best scoring UTSA team of all time.
Wow.
Last year's team was pretty potent.
Yeah.
This one with no NFL running back prospect is even better. A lot of it has to do with the fact that we have, obviously a wide receiver core that's, a year older, and Frank just being a wizard. But just incredible to see some of these things. Like Frank is 155 for 224. He's completing 69% of his passes. He's got 1,997 yards, almost 2,000.
It'll be 2,000 very quickly.
13 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. We're at halfway point. You double all these things. He's close to getting to 4,000 yards passing, 26 touchdowns. Maybe not 8 interceptions. Let's hope that that's not the case.
Yeah. We'll just take that 3 from Middle Tennessee out as an anomaly.
Yeah. But still, those are getting to start being almost UTSA video game type numbers because we haven't seen that type of passing or offensive attack. Rushing wise, Brendan Brady's 98 rushes for 386 yards, 5 touchdowns. Frank, 52 rushes, 254 yards, 5 touchdowns. Traylon's kind of trailing there, but he hasn't really had a chance to really play too much.
Right.
Josh Cephas leads the team in receptions, 44 for 549 yards, 2 touchdowns. Zakari, 43 catches, 586 yards, 6 touchdowns, and JT, who obviously is our big play receiver, only, quote-unquote, 39 catches for 618 yards and, only 7 touchdowns.
Right.
Obviously, JT's the big play guy, but just amazing the numbers these guys are putting up. I think looking back to 2019, when we first started seeing these names pop up, Frank really looking like he might actually play a whole season, didn't get a chance to, but I don't think I would have ever imagined saying Frank's on pace for almost 4,000 yards passing.
Right. And JT, we weren't even really talking about JT in 2019.
we were not. I mean, it was just like...
We really weren't talking about JT until the end of 2020, to be honest.
Right. It's just amazing to me, just the growth. You know, whether, you want to say it started with Frank Wilson or, whether it's been Traylor, whatever it is, just amazing to see where these guys started from, where they are. And for us, I think as fans, look back 3 years ago and say, would you have imagined that this would have been almost the end result of these three guys, at least these three receivers?
No.
Incredible. I think we would have really still been stuck on Sincere and what, him potentially rushing for, 2,000 yards or something like that. All right, with that, let's talk offensive player of the game. It's the guy that I said at the beginning of the year I had a soft spot for. I'm going Josh Cephas. Yes, I know that I think the line played really well, especially the interior. Maka had a hell of a game. He can just is consistent. And again, one of those guys, as I almost mentioned earlier about, Jared Sackett. He gets overlooked, but man, he continues to show up every single game and play really well. Josh Cephas, the reason I'm doing this is because, he had a lot of key plays. Notably for me was obviously the Carpenter recovery in the end zone, but that fourth down, you mentioned it earlier, the kind of backstretch where he turned around and made sure that no matter what, I'm going all out to get that first down.
Right.
I just...
and it was the difference of the game. Right.
I mean, it closed out the game for us there. And I just think, based on... I just want to go back real quick. We mentioned on one of our early podcasts, we'd gone to the COVID bowl game, and we had seen this friction between Josh and Frank during that game against Louisiana. Just interesting to see how the one that makes the big play here to close out this game was a pass to Josh. Really in a spot where I think you're going to find Josh anyway. Could have gone to Zakari, could have gone to JT, nope. Went to the sure-handed Josh Cephas. All right, so let's go on to the defense. A little preview review. First thing I said was beast out with that open field tackling. I mean, it was underwhelming, considering there's plenty of opportunities for that wrap up, or stopping these Western Kentucky receivers short. I just think it's always going to be just a point of contention. I just don't want to beat it into the ground. Traylor, addressed it during this past week. Said, we really look at the yards after contact. Okay, well, here's why you can't close out games on defense is because you're missing tackles and you're allowing these receivers to get extra yards and extend drives. So I get where he's coming from. However, you counter with this game, with the Western Kentucky game, where they really had plenty of plays that they broke. Western Kentucky, I just didn't think had the right game plan offensively for this. That said, the other thing I said was defensive line needs to get pressure on Austin Reed. He did well when he got blitzed or just under pressure overall. But the thing is, when you're getting blitzed, you want to push that ball down the field, and he really wasn't pushing that ball down the field. It was short. There were some medium passes, like between 10 and 20 yards, which still, a nice length of pass. But I would say overall with Austin Reed, I just was not impressed with him. I had said that he was a pretty average-ish quarterback. I got the comparisons to Bailey Zappi, but I just never felt like the defense had really had a lot to worry about. You had another take on him.
I just felt like he had a bit of a dad bod. Was not what I was expecting to see from a quarterback that's been spoken so highly of. It's like a little gut there.
I mean, he did come from FCS. He still needs some FBS shape, but...
I mean, so did Bailey Zappi, but, looked like he was in better shape.
Hence why I felt like the defense was going to be okay in this game. I think that there's certainly some things that they can improve on offensively to really threaten a defense, at least a good defense. I think they'll still do some damage against some of these Conference USA defenses, just because not all Conference USA defenses have the personnel that UTSA has, especially in the secondary. Now, I did notice some plays, at least in the rewatch, that the secondary was motioning towards the sideline, where it looks like they didn't have the coverages. And one in particular stood out to me was that Ken Robinson was just started to just jump around in the air.
Yeah, he was really trying to get somebody's attention. Like, we don't know what play we're going to have.
Yeah, he had no clue what he was supposed to be guarding. And so, we've seen these before. Again, I don't really want to beat the dead horse, but Atos, why are we still seeing this? Like, it doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, it was kind of odd because, it hasn't happened as dramatically in a while, and maybe it was just different player personnel being out there or what have you, but it was very obvious, particularly in the rewatch, that there were some times where you could tell we did not have our act together, and you wouldn't expect that with the coaches being the same really on the defense this year, or at least in the secondary, compared to maybe if that was on the offense where we have a new coordinator and
Right. I don't have any more answers, but I think I think there's ways for Western Kentucky to have taken more advantage of it. They almost did. I believe it was in the second quarter, right before their second touchdown to go up 14-7. It was around midfield, and I don't think that they got the signals in, but we had a cornerback go on a blitz, which was weird because he was out wide. Why you were getting blitz that cornerback from out wide, who knows? But because of the pace of the game, there was a big pass. I can't remember who caught it. I just know that Rashad kind of knocked him out of bounds, but it was right before like I said, that second touchdown. And again, it looked like Rashad was like looking for the call on the side and didn't know where he was supposed to be at. And so, I think, again, maybe I am beating this a little bit too much, but I think that there are some coaching problems here. So I think as we look at some of the stats from the defense, they're going to pop out to you. But I think the other part to this is, why can't we solve some of these? Like, these are just lingering problems. And it's not like we didn't know that Western Kentucky was going to speed up. I mean,
right.
That's what we do. So you should be used to it.
Yeah,
you practice against a team that does that.
I think it's just something you have to keep your eye on as we get further into conference play. Because like you said, someone else is going to be watching that game tape, and they're going to try to exploit, that in their games.
Exactly. All right. Rashad Wisdom now holds a career record for solo tackles at 176. Kudos to Rashad. But, let's be honest. He's had a nice career here at UTSA. And the fact that he wouldn't be up there, or at least, have some sort of records, much like Frank is like rewriting the UTSA offensive book, would seem just weird. But I think good, again, for, Rashad to get this and really complete this at home. Even though it really wasn't made a big deal of, really cool that he got to do it in the Dome. All right. Let's talk again. Now that we're midway through the season, let's talk some defensive stats. We're giving up 447.8 yards per game. That's ranked 115th in the nation.
How many teams are there?
There's 131.
Okay.
33 points per game, which is ranked 111th. They're on track for the worst defensive total yardage and third worst scoring defense in UTSA history all time. Look,
it just doesn't feel like that should be the case.
We've had some pretty bad defenses, but
yeah,
I think that kind of goes to show you like some of the issues that we're having. First of all, this is a talented defense, but we're not getting the turnovers like we did last year.
Right.
That was a thing that we could really point to. Case in point, we played Western Kentucky last year, in Bowling Green, Kentucky, and I think if you were listening or if you were watching the game at the time, you saw that amazing Clarence Hicks interception to end the game. We had none of those in this game, right? There was one turnover, and it was the Brendan Brady fumble, and it just felt like at one point I turned to you and I was like, it felt like we've turned it over more. I never at any point turned over to you and said, or looked at you and said, hey, we should have gotten, a fumble recovery there, or, we should have intercepted that pass, or we should have, like, that's just not happening. I think that's some of the frustration with the defense too. Like, we're just not getting that. We're not getting to the quarterback, and we're not getting turnovers.
Right.
Now, it's funny because Traylor made this comment about the defense where he felt really bad for them because he said, hey, it's, you guys just look at the defensive stats, but, we're really concentrating on certain things. Well, here's sort of some sobering stats just for everybody, because he said, hey, we played some really tough teams. Have everybody look at those teams, and, you'll see why we are where we are. Well, in the first 3 games against Houston Army and UT, obviously we went 1-2 in those 3 games. We gave up 430 yards per game and gave up 38.7 points per game. Now against Texas Southern, Middle Tennessee, and now Western Kentucky, we've gone 3-0, but we've given up 465.7 yards per game, an increase of about 35 yards. Mm-hmm. But we're only giving up 27.3 points per game. So yes, better teams, we're giving up less yards, but we're getting outscored. Worse teams, we're giving up a whole lot more yards.
Right.
When you think that would plummet some more because they're not as good.
Right.
But we're still giving up about 27 points per game. Certainly befuddling. And I think, I've been really big on doing some stats. And I looked at, if you don't see it on Twitter, but his name is Stats of War. His name is Parker. And really the comparison is, for your team is looking at just how well your offense is doing and then how well your defense is doing. And we're constantly in the quadrant that's like, good offense, defense needs help. And, I think that again leads to the whole, we were really expecting dominance, but this defense is just giving it way too many yards. And obviously, not really, making those stops in terms of the points. Though, I would also counter by saying UT kept, it doesn't take into account, trash time. So,
right.
Any last thoughts about the defense before going to the player of the game?
No, I guess it really just is surprising to me to hear some of those stats because, I do feel like we have talented guys on defense and in some cases more talented guys than we've had in the past, even compared to last year. But, again, Traylor has a different philosophy on tackling and maybe your average fan. And
that's a good way of putting it.
Again, he's looking at this from a different lens and probably looking at it from the lens of, hey, we're still winning these conference games, so, a win is a win.
Very good point. All right, defensive player of the game. I'm going for another guy that I think I have more of a soft spot than I ever want to really admit to, but it's Ken Robinson. Played safety and cornerback in this game. We've talked about depth in so many positions. We've talked about, how the secondary has gotten torched, some of the issues they've had. We're so fortunate to have a guy like Ken Robinson, who I really thought was going to bust out and be a big-time star. But you know what? He's still good. Maybe he's not the star that I thought that he might pop out to be. But I will say this. How many teams can roll out Corey Mayfield and Nick Troy Fortune, 2 very good cornerbacks here at this G5 level? I'd argue that Nick Troy is probably better than Corey, and it's not a hit at Corey. Corey's pretty damn good. So, that's really 2 good starting cornerbacks. And then have Ken, who I think is a very solid, good cornerback that if we had him in the early Coker Wilson years, we'd be like, oh, we've got a cornerback. We got sort of a shutdown guy. So just kind of fortunate to me that we have, Ken and can really rely on his versatility.
Yeah, and it's a testament again to Traylor's culture that he's established, that you see these players really being selfless, and when you listen to him in his interview today, again, he was like, I'm going to do whatever coach wants me to do, whatever the team needs, and that really is priceless at the G5 level.
And as much as, we like to take some shots, and say oh, this guy didn't do this guy didn't do that. They're so hard not to like that. Right. It's like, yeah, I get it. It's UTSA. It's our team. But just watching them talk, watching them play, they're giving as much effort as possible, and it's just hard not to really fall in love with these guys. So, good job, Ken. We'll move on. All right, let's talk this week's opponent, FIU. It's a short week, Atos. Playing on Friday. 33-point favorites. Initial thoughts on FIU?
Well, I think the first thought is we can't overlook them because, again, this should be a very dominant victory, but I feel like when we went back to the Texas Southern game, it was clear that we overlooked them to some extent. Now, again, we still won the game. We still won the game in strong fashion. But, we do have North Texas coming up, but we can't overlook the FIU game because we're getting ready for North Texas.
FIU is a pretty good veteran head coach in Mike McIntyre. Excuse me. We've seen him before. I think when he had, I believe it was San Jose State that he coached way back in the Coker years. I could be wrong. I could be off by a year or so, but he did put together some pretty good teams. He's got really just a big job here because FIU has not really been very supportive of athletics, specifically this football program. It's why Butch Davis ended up leaving. Though Butch left that cupboard empty.
Yeah.
I do not, I'm really not stating anything falsely when I say that this team lacks talent and depth at every single position. I think they may have a couple players here or there, but I would say I don't think there's a comparison UTSA-wise. UTSA has always had at least a few players and have always been better than what FIU is at this point. But man, FIU is really at rock bottom right now, and I don't know that this gets dug out of by Mike within the next 2 to 3 years. This is a major rebuild job. It's not something that you see like a Bob Stoops go to Oklahoma and all of a sudden they were down in the dumps, and then he turned around to go to a bowl game that next year and then national championship second year. It's not a trailer job here where he's gonna just he's gonna get to 7 wins that first year. This is long term, so this is why we're kind of big on the being 33-point favorites. This is kind of comparable to Texas Southern a bit. I think they're a little more talented than
sure.
Texas Southern, but I don't know that it's that much. And it sounds like I'm joking, but I'm not. Like there is certainly I would say a gap in talent between Texas Southern and FIU, but I can't tell you that it's that much. That said, let's put the warning out here first, because even though it's 33 points, even though it's FIU, UTSA is 0-3 all time in Florida. Outscored by an average of 26-15, with the last 2 visits being a touchdown and then 3 points. That 3 points was Traylor's one and only visit to Florida against FAU back in the COVID season. So obviously we've grown from there. Obviously we're not playing FAU. However, still some tough stats to see.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is potentially a trap game, so you just have to make sure that you stay focused and you stay dialed in. And
I like how you put it. I mean, obviously a big game is coming up against North Texas on homecoming. So certainly an opportunity to look ahead. They're all humans, and I know I hate it when Traylor says that sometimes because it makes it sound weird when he says, "Oh, they're such good humans." But yes, they're humans. They might have a penchant for overlooking FIU, and you get why. But I think they come out focused, everything's going to be okay.
Right.
So let's get into previewing FIU a little. This offense puts up 325.6 yards per game, which is ranked 115th out of 131 teams. Atos.
Thank you.
And they score 16.6 points per game, which ranks 125th. They put up maybe 2 touchdowns and a field goal every single game. That's what they average. Mm-hmm. That's Frank Wilson type tough offense to watch. And these guys, I think, have less talent than some of those Frank Wilson teams. Mm-hmm. Though that 2018 team, I don't know, that was, I think, may have challenged this one. Certainly some things though to kind of look to. At least for FIU, quarterback Grayson James, he took over for Gunnar Holmberg. They were losing to Bryant College. I can't remember which one was their first game.
Yeah,
I can't remember if it was college or university, but I know it was Bryant. I don't even know where Bryant is. I just knew that I turned it on, I saw the score, and I was like, FIU, what are you doing? Like, you're FBS. I'm a little, lost for words there, but Gunnar Holmberg, who I think had transferred over from Duke, starting quarterback, he's just not good. That's the simplest way to put it. Sophomore Grayson James took over, and he's an average quarterback at best. I think he tries to make as many plays as he can with the limited weapons that he has. I mean, he's completing about 62% of his passes. He's got 7 touchdowns and 4 interceptions. He really hasn't thrown for that many yards. It's tough for them to churn out yards. That said, their running back, Lexington Joseph, he's a nice short running back. I say short because, once again, like, look at all these CUSA kind of skill players, and they all seem to be like 5'10" or under, which I shouldn't be making fun of because I'm about 5'10", but
you didn't play D1 football.
Well, yeah, and I think that's where I was going to go with, which is cool. I'm down with these guys, but yeah, if I'm not playing D1 football at 5'10", then I'm not saying that they shouldn't be. It's just that height differential can be tough. He's a good little running back. He just doesn't gain many yards. He really struggles. He's averaging 5.5 yards per carry. However, that's only because in the last game against Connecticut, he had 7 rushes for 103 yards. That bumped up the average.
Sure.
He was at 3.6. That's just not going to do the job. Which tells you a little bit about their offensive line as well. Now, one key guy to talk about here is wide receiver Tyrese Chambers. He's a former UTSA recruit coming out of the FCS. Clear that when he came out of the FCS, he picked the wrong school because now he's sticking it out at FIU at a losing school. However, he has had 27 catches for 262 yards for 3 touchdowns. He is a very good deep threat. He could challenge the secondary, but I don't see UTSA not potentially going one-on-one with him.
And isn't he maybe injured?
I think he's on the injured list. I mean, he could play. I think if a team recruited you, there's a good chance they're probably going to, he wants to show UTSA what he could do. But,
sure.
That's a good question. I don't know that if he actually plays. We'll find out, I guess, game time on Friday. As of now, yes, him and 2 offensive linemen are hurt. Again, the recipe for some UTSA dominance here. Mm-hmm. Only other guy I wanted to mention was Jalen Bracey, who's the next wide receiver threat should Chambers be out. He's got 17 catches for 126 yards, 1 touchdown. 17 catches for 126 yards. That's like a 9-point-something average. It tells you that this offense struggles to move the ball.
Right.
And this is something that the defense can really take advantage of. Now, let's go to the defense. That defense is giving up 447 yards per game, which is ranked 114th, which is 1 spot ahead of UTSA. I'm not trying to make... I'm just saying, look at the difference, though. You've got an FIU team that's not very good at all.
I think we need to challenge your stats on that, on UTSA being 115th and FIU being 114th, because... they got blown out by Western Kentucky 71-0. So they gave up 71 points one game, and you're telling me that statistically they're ranked 1 spot better than us? That I can't. It's hard to believe that. Again.
I understand. No, I understand. They are also allowing 38.2 points per game, which is ranked 124th, which is 13 spots lower than UTSA's defense at 33 points per game. I brought up those midway point things because I wanted to make sure that everybody understood just where we were at and why when I started talking about FIU and how bad they are we as bad as FIU's defense? No. But other thing you need to think about is this. FIU being not very good, especially on offense, they've given up the ball. So shorter fields, that's why their defense is probably giving up less yards. They're not long drives.
Sure.
So that's another reason. This defense overall, not very good, but they are led by linebacker Gathan Bernadell. Sorry, I think I said his name right. And safety Demetrius Hill. The fact that Hill is, again, one of their top tacklers, again, you have a secondary player having to be a top tackler. That's just, obviously, even during the UTSA thin years, obviously a recipe for, failure. So here's the UTSA keys to victory. I'm going to keep them simple. On offense, execute early on drives and just jump on that scoreboard early. Defense, wear them down on the line and demoralize a bad offense. This is about demoralizing FIU early, not to
run it up 71-0.
No, we're not trying to run up the score, but again, I think what UTSA should really wants to work on overall on offense and defense. We're not going to give up yards. We're not going to give up points. And that's why I want to see them in a way, demoralize them early. Take that heart out.
All right, before you get to your prediction here, Bryant is in Rhode Island, which is known for its football, which is why you've not heard of them. They are an FCS program from Rhode Island.
And FIU struggled against them. So, again, I think it's tough to see this game being too competitive. But that's what we said about Texas Southern. So that's why I hesitate, with all this. FIU is still an FBS program. So, something that, we've already talked about ad nauseum about looking past. I just think UTSA exercises their Florida demons. They come out energetic. They come out determined. They put FIU away early. So, way too early prediction. Give me UTSA 52-20 over FIU, and they get the first ever win in Florida.
Before we go, let's do a little Conference USA roundup. Talk about some of the action that happened in the rest of the conference last week. UAB and Middle Tennessee played. Was really hoping that Middle Tennessee was going to bounce back, but apparently not. They lost to UAB 41-14. I guess beating Miami was kind of their apex mountain for the season.
I think they're still patting their back on it. I mean, I thought it was hilarious that Rick Stockstill came out after that game and was like making the whole thing about we got paid, 1.7 or 1.6, and they only averaged 1.5 per play or whatever. It's like, good, you talked your stuff, but there's still plenty of games left, right?
I know. I mean, now he's down 2 conference games, and he's got Western Kentucky. So
it gets easier, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, apparently there's quite the rivalry between Middle Tennessee and Western Kentucky. So, that'll be an interesting game.
Oh, Rick.
Yeah. Louisiana Tech beat UTEP.
Why did they beat UTEP? Tell me, Atos.
Apparently, they went with a game strategy of forcing Gavin Hardimson to throw. And, well, we know how that works.
Wow. Hey, but thank you, La Tech, for, using my game plan. Obviously,
They must have
someone's
listened
to you. Listening to it.
That's right.
I'm going to pat myself on the back for that one.
So, looking over the Conference USA standings at this point in the season, I wouldn't have expected to see North Texas sitting atop the standings with us, followed by Rice. But there it is.
I'm going to just disagree with you. I thought North Texas would be up there. Again, I think North Texas is a tough squad. Again, I don't know that they're as overall talented as UTSA or some of these other teams, but they just seem to play well at the right time, and they seem to just take advantage of other teams. So, again, why not them? I think that Latrell is going to be there a little bit longer, and I'm kind of laughing because I know UNC fans probably don't want to hear that.
I mean, apparently, when he won that game against UTSA, he was like, I'm going to make the most of my next year that I got up.
Again, good for them. They're having success. It's going to be, I think, a hell of a fight, in a couple weeks when they come into the Dome for homecoming.
But we can't talk about it now because it's a culture code violation.
Okay, well, it's not my culture. I don't play for UTSA. But now, let's talk about Rice real quick. Yes, that one is surprising, but based on the way they've played, again, it's just playing, I guess, smart. It's not very good offensively. It's not terribly dominant defensively. But again, much like North Texas, they're playing, I think, in maximizing all of their abilities. Bloomgren, I think, has done a very good job this year to put them in this position.
Now, outside of Conference USA, I'm not sure what happened. Apparently, there was was there a freeze or a snowstorm in San Marcos, over the weekend that I didn't hear about? Because Texas State beat Appalachian State 36-24.
So if you said San Marcos was freezing, is that hell freezing over?
Yeah. What happened to Appalachian State? I mean,
well, one of our friends, T-Row, is going to be happy. He's a Texas State alum. I told him, hey, you guys got an upset. 5 hours later, after he saw that, he responded back to me. He's like, "Yeah, we're back." I was like,
"One game.
You've never been back." But seriously, like, that's a hell of a win for Spav.
Yeah.
As much as
that is his signature win right there.
Yeah, and as much as we make fun of Texas State, poor Spav, I would say, because of the fact that he doesn't have the facilities, doesn't have the money or anything infrastructure that Jeff Traylor has. So I think he's maximized everything he can. I don't know, you replace Spav, I don't know who else you bring in, unless Texas State starts trying to fund their program like an actual FBS program. That said, looks like they might be headed in the future to their first bowl game. Again, good for them. They probably need it. But, App State. But as much as I'm going to say something about App State, this right here, Atos. This is why we love college football. Because anything can happen.
Absolutely.
You can go from beating Miami one weekend and then getting your butt absolutely handed to you by UTSA.
Right. Or
you can go to beating, A&M.
Texas A&M.
In College Station. Even though it looks like A&M's not very good. And then come into San Marcos and lay in a pooper.
I know. I mean, they only scored 3 points in the first half. So they scored 21 of their 24 points in the second half. But they still couldn't overcome the Bobcats. So
Steaming pile of poop.
Yeah. Anyways, moving on to something much more positive. Let's talk about Tariq Woolen. Once again, he is just having a fantastic rookie season. This past game against the Saints, he gets a fumble recovery, and then apparently that wasn't good enough, so he got an interception as well. I mean, what an amazing season Tariq is having.
It doesn't make sense, but some guys get to the pros and they just bloom, and Tariq apparently has. I mean, he still has some work to do.
Which, I think he probably could have had a fabulous season last year had he been healthy the whole time. But,
But I think
it's a lot harder to catch when you have a club on. Now he can catch.
He's doing so well and could end up being a defensive player of the year, or defensive rookie of the year in the NFL. But also Spencer Burford, who's been quietly putting together a solid season as well as a starter for a team that really is playoff bound and potentially a Super Bowl contender. Two big things. I mean, obviously Tariq's getting a lot of playing time because he's on a bad team, but Spencer being, I think, on a really good team, really good seeing these two guys, essentially a 4th round pick and a 5th round pick, really take off and do well and really represent UTSA and San Antonio really well.
Yeah, and the cool thing, going back to Tariq, obviously he's playing the Saints. Marcus Davenport's there. Apparently they must have exchanged jerseys, and he showed a picture of what Marcus had given him and written him a really nice note on his jersey. So it was just really cool to kind of see that camaraderie between these guys and just seeing the success again, of all of the players that are in the NFL.
If these guys have really long careers, 3 of them, have really big time careers, it speaks well of UTSA. But the fact that they still seem pretty humble and pretty still really still understanding and taking essentially the culture they got with Traylor of stacking more good days on top of each other, you routinely hear that from both, from at least Spencer we've heard it from, and I think Tariq is kind of mentioned as much. Mm-hmm. So see them kind of carry that on and make that just part of their lives. I still think we've got some big things coming from all 3 of them, really, but definitely from Spencer and Tariq since they're the most recent.
And then last but not least, women's soccer returns to Park West for a game against Middle Tennessee on Thursday at 7 p.m. So if you are able to go support them. It's a pink out game.
They've had I think an up and down season a little bit. Some tough losses. They just haven't.
Some tough ties because they tied this year.
Yeah, I mean, there's been some things where they've obviously had a couple of games where they've lost last minute, had some last minute scores. So it's just the fact that they haven't been able to put that offense together and really, I think pile on some of these teams that they probably should have been piling on and then end up losing to them, in a heartbreaking fashion. Houston, stands out to me because they really had so many opportunities against Houston and they just could not get the ball on the goal.
All right, well, that wraps it up for this week. So thank you for joining the Hail Mary podcast. I'm A-Toes.
Down the toes.
We'll be back next week to recap our big win over FIU.
Birds up.